Good evening. I'm Karen Taylor, Program Director of the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York, and I'd like to welcome you here this evening. I am delighted, we are delighted that you can be here this evening. Tonight's lecture is part of the 2018 Labour, Literature and Landmark Lectures, and this evening is the second in the Spring 2018 Landmark Lectures. The Labour, Literature and Landmark Lectures are supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council. We're also very pleased to present this series of landmark lectures in partnership with the New York Landmarks Conservancy, and I would like to express our appreciation for their help and support. For those of you who may be less familiar with the General Society, a brief introduction. The General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York is a non-profit organization that was founded in 1785 by 22 artisans. Today, our 233-year-old organization continues to serve and improve the quality of life for the people of New York City through our educational and cultural programs. These programs include our tuition-free Mechanics Institute, our Lock Museum upstairs, and for any of you who have not visited before, if you please feel free to visit the Lock Museum after the lecture, and the General Society of Library, of course, which you're sitting in, and our nearly 200-year-old lecture series, of which this lecture is part of. You will also find an informational postcard on your seat that gives some more background information to the Society. The 2018 Landmark Lecture Series is created by Lisa Easton, a partner in New York City-based architecture and historic preservation firm, Easton Architects, and Lisa's very sorry she cannot be here this evening. Our speakers tonight are from New York City's Landmarks Preservation Commission, and they will be discussing LPC's Historic Building Data Project. Lisa Kersavage is the Director of Special Projects and Strategic Planning at the LPC. She supervises the work of the Research, Archaeology, and Environmental Review departments and manages special research projects. Lisa previously served as the Senior Director of Preservation and Sustainability at the Municipal Arts Society. She was also Preservation Policy Consultant to the William Penn Foundation and Executive Director of the Fitch Foundation and Friends of the Upper East Side Historic Districts. She holds an MS in Historic Preservation from Columbia University and a BA in Art History from Penn State. Daniel Watts, our second speaker, is the Geographic Information System, GIS, Administrator and Planning Analyst at the LPC, where he coordinates GIS projects and data analysis. Dan holds master degrees in urban planning and historic preservation from the University of Virginia and Clemson University. It is now my great pleasure to introduce to you Lisa Kersavage and Daniel Watts.
Hello, everybody, and good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight to talk about historic preservation data, which I promise is much more interesting than it sounds at first blush. I want to take the time to thank the sponsors of tonight's event, the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen and the New York Landmarks Conservancy. I'm Lisa Kersavage, the Director of Special Projects and Strategic Planning at Landmarks, and I'm joined by Daniel Watts, LPC's GIS Administrator and Planning Analyst. And we are very pleased to be here tonight to talk about LPC's Historic Building Data Project, which is the largest and most comprehensive historic building data collection created by a municipal preservation agency in the United States. Through the project, which was funded by the New York Community Trust, building by building information was transferred from 50 years of the Commission's designation reports into a database consolidating decades of research. The Commission's endeavor to collect, document, and analyze data enhanced our ability to understand the full breadth of our 50 years of designations, to advocate for designations amongst property owners, community boards, and city council, to inform preservation policy, and to continually evaluate and improve our ongoing work. There we go. While we are primarily going to focus on the Historic Building Data Project tonight, I do want to review some of our transparency initiatives which rely on data and give some context to our research work that powers the data. Dan is going to discuss the technical issues and implementation of the project, and we will share how the data project is being used already. And we will conclude with a demonstration of LPC's web map and open data portal, so you can all go home tonight and access this information yourself. As I'm sure many of you know in the audience, the Landmarks Preservation Commission is the mayoral agency responsible for protecting and preserving New York City's architecturally and culturally and historically significant buildings and sites. Much of the agency's work is dedicated to regulating historic buildings, and the LPC's preservation department is by far its largest. The agency also has an archaeology, environmental review, and enforcement departments. But tonight we're going to primarily focus on the work of the agency's research department, which is responsible for identifying and documenting the significance of the city's historic buildings and districts. One of the overarching goals of our strategic plan is to ensure transparency and access to the agency's information and the Commission's work. Our commitment to be transparent, informative, and educational is highlighted by features on our website that bring our work to the public, and a number of important initiatives have been launched in the last 3 years. And many of these initiatives depend on accurate and robust data. Related to our research, through our online database, the public can access over 50 years of research embodied in the Commission's 1,681 designation reports, which are also on our web map. We also have an online search tool to determine whether a building is in a historic district. And we also have created interactive thematic maps that chronicle histories of different New Yorkers that are celebrated through our landmark designations. In 2015, we created an interactive LGBT history map, which you can see a screen grab of here. And most recently, we released New York City Landmarks and the Vote at 100 to celebrate the 100th anniversary of women winning the right to vote in New York State. Our preservation department processes approximately 14,000 applications each year. About 94 to 97% are staff-level applications. Since 2016, our website allows you to find and review the status of all active applications, as well as all of those processed in the last 2 years. Of those 14 to 15,000 applications, about 400 to 500 require a public hearing and the opportunity for public input. Since 2015, through our website, we post material online so people can understand what the applications are, and that allows for public testimony to be submitted through the portal, so that people are able to testify in person or submit it through this portal. And this feature ensures that community boards, advocates, neighbors, and the public can easily understand what is being proposed in their communities, and they can testify in person or, again, submit through the portal. Finally, we also have transparency initiatives related to archaeology. In 2016, LPC launched the Nan A. Rothschild Research Center and Repository, and a website for New York City's archaeological collections. New York City is the first municipality to systematically collect, catalog, and curate, and make accessible the city's archaeological resources. The everyday objects in the collections reveal what life was like for people that were often not documented in historic records. Now researchers can come and study these artifacts of the repository or access them on this website. To date, we have cataloged 203,000 objects from 12 projects. The total number of artifacts in the repository is around 1 million, so we still have a ways to go with our documentation, and that is actually likely to grow with future additional collections. In addition to the collection, the website includes image exhibits and collection highlights and overviews of archaeological sites, and it's a really fun thing to visit. So now I'd like to focus on LPC's research and designations. Since its creation in 1965, LPC has designated and regulates more than 36,000 buildings and sites in all 5 boroughs, including 1,410 individual landmarks, 141 historic districts and extensions, 120 interior landmarks, and 10 scenic landmarks. Since 2014 alone, we've designated 3,867 buildings, including 62 individual landmarks, 10 historic districts and extensions, and 3 interior landmarks. Currently, there are 483 buildings calendared for consideration as landmarks at this moment. So our public process for designation includes 3 steps: a public meeting to calendar for consideration, a public hearing, and a public meeting, at which time the Commission votes to designate. However, there's an incredible amount of work that's done by the research department prior to and during this process. The research staff undertakes detailed building-by-building research, uncovering dates of construction, architect, original use, and other information. In the case of historic districts, we do extensive boundary analysis and finally produce very detailed designation reports. In order to uncover the date of construction and this other information about the buildings, staff turns to a number of sources. These can include DOB records, historic photographs, historic maps, census data, deeds and conveyances, newspapers, and they spend a lot of time really getting detailed and accurate information on each building. And then for historic district, this information becomes the data that helps us do boundary analysis. So as a very quick case study, I just want to show some recent analysis. Today we had a public hearing on the proposed Central Harlem West 130th to 132nd Street Historic District, a highly intact district that illustrates not only the architectural development of Harlem, but the rich social, cultural, and political life of Harlem's African-American population in the 20th century. So taking all of that building-by-building information, we can use GIS to help us understand the district. In this case, we mapped building age, and you can see that the proposed district contains almost exclusively 19th century construction, with some 21st century buildings interspersed. And likewise, when the building styles are mapped, as we see here, the predominance of Neo-Grec becomes clear with these wonderful rows of Neo-Grec buildings with clusters of Renaissance Revival and Queen Anne style buildings interspersed on all 3 streets. And also typology. As built, the proposed district is primarily residential in character, consisting mostly of row houses, but also including some original apartment buildings, some institutional buildings, mostly churches, interspersed, and a commercial building as well. Of course, data and GIS doesn't tell us everything about a district. It's one tool that we use, particularly when it comes to cultural significance. The research staff layers on information about the cultural significance of the buildings and the neighborhood. And in this case, we learned that the proposed district has a particularly prominent musical history, as well as very important civil rights connections. For example, this building was used as the national headquarters for the March on Washington, and is strongly associated with Bayard Rustin, who in 2013 was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So this is information that we rely on in addition to this data and this GIS analysis. So finally, as part of LPC's designation process, the history and significance of each landmark and district is carefully documented in designation reports. The Commission uses these as the basis for their vote on whether to designate. And these reports form the basis for the LPC's regulatory work and are regularly used by the staff, as well as property owners and applicants, and also an interested public who just want to learn more about a neighborhood. And these reports contain detailed building histories and descriptions, as well as an essay explaining why this place is important and meets the LPC criteria for designation. And as of now, we have more than 50 years of reports, and I think this is incredible. This totals some 45,171 pages of documentation. So in the last few years, we found ourselves with this extensive research on historic buildings, but much of it was not really that accessible or easy to analyze across different districts. The image you see here is a map that LPC staff used to determine whether a property was designated or not, until fairly recently. So we were operating in a fairly low-tech way for quite some time. And we knew this was really a treasure trove of information and of data, essentially. Also, the large number of designations in New York City makes it critical for the agency to have accurate data on buildings under its jurisdiction. And the LPC's efficiency and transparency initiatives really depend on highly accurate data. So with that, I want to turn it over to Dan to discuss the project implementation and how we managed to take this on. Dan did this incredible job on a very, very difficult project.
Thanks so much, Lisa. In this next section, I'd like to talk about the technical implementation of LPC's historic building data project from the conceptual idea through project development and data production, and then finally, how it's being currently used. Lisa touched on this a little bit earlier, but the purpose of the Historic Building Data Project, which was started in early 2017 and completed in the spring of this year, was to compile building-by-building information for more than 50 years of the Commission's designation reports, and then transfer that data into a Geographic Information Systems database. So before I get into this next slide, just out of curiosity, how many of you know what a Geographic Information System is, or perhaps have used one? Okay, so a pretty good number, but I'll still give a definition just so everybody is up to speed. So a geographic information system is a system designed to capture, analyze, manage, and present all types of geographical data. The key word of this technology is geography. This means that some portion of the data is spatial. In other words, data that is in some way referenced to a location on the Earth. Again, Lisa touched on this a little bit earlier, but as part of the LPC's designation process, the history and significance of each landmark and district is carefully documented in designation reports. These reports form the basis for LPC's regulatory work and are regularly used by staff as well as property owners and applicants. Over the last 53 years, LPC staff have generated tens of thousands of pages, I think 47,171 pages of research with detailed descriptions for all 36,000 buildings and sites, or almost all of them. But throughout the agency's history, designation report information has been stored in a variety of different formats, ranging from physical documents to PDFs, and most recently in digital form. But from a data perspective, the wide variety of formats made it very difficult, if not impossible, to search for information across historic districts or individual landmarks, making it challenging to fully understand the breadth of the city's designated buildings. In late 2006, we began the process of studying the possibilities of developing a GIS database to store designated building data. The overall purpose of the GIS database was to take LPC building data from designation reports and transfer it in from its varied formats into one database that would enable actual analysis, easier management, and a greater understanding of designated buildings and sites. Within the database, captured LPC data would be tied to Department of Buildings footprints for the graphic interface. You can see here, this is the South Village Historic District. So this is what would actually appear within a GIS. And the decision was made to tie LPC data to building footprints instead of tax lots because designation reports are based on buildings and not the tax lots themselves. For example, one tax lot could have multiple buildings on it, and that's the primary reason. We also decided to include identifying data from Department of Buildings and the Department of Finance in the database to enable data flexibility and usefulness in a variety of future analysis projects. There were, however, definite challenges associated with transferring LPC designation report data into a GIS database. 52 years worth of building data collection meant that the quality and type of data varied widely across designation reports, depending on the era in which they were written. Because of the varied formats, there was also the question of what types of existing data could be reliably captured across decades of reports that had different styles and had unique methods of information presentation. While much of the data, especially from designation reports written before 1975, was difficult to work with, we were fortunate enough that as a result of LPC advances in storing building information for the past 8 to 10 years or so, more recent designations could be, were easier to work with, and that the data transfer could be automated. In the end, manual data entry, meaning an individual sitting in front of a PC, was performed for approximately 27,000 buildings and sites. So that was a major portion of this project. Significant thought was also put into the design of the database, what we would call a schema, that it would actually hold the captured LPC data. After an in-depth review of designation reports from different decades, database fields were chosen that could flexibly accommodate information collected from 1965 to present. Fields included the building's or site's designation address as it appears in the designation report, original construction dates, information on architects, owners, and developers, major alterations and alteration architects. And here I want to emphasize that these were only major alterations. So, for example, an additional story being added to the building. We also looked at style and material information, as well as original use and building type. After database design and development was completed, we began to examine the process of manual data entry and how it could be standardized and regulated. Rules were established to ensure accuracy and uniformity during data entry, including the use of domains, which basically require the selection from a predetermined list of options, as well as required fields. One rule, however, was the most important. That was that data for each building was to be, as much as possible, directly transcribed from designation report text, with the end goal of representing each designation report building entry as accurately as possible in the database. Another important point to make about our data entry process was that the goal was consistency in describing what was designated or what existed at time of designation versus what is currently in the designations now, or in the designated districts or landmarks now. If changes have occurred, they are reflected in the notes field, not top-level information, which will reflect what was originally in the designation report. So for example, this lot here, or this address, 4 West 21st Street in the Ladies Mile Historic District, at time of designation, it was a parking lot with essentially a parking attendant structure on it. Now there exists a multi-story building on it, which was built circa 2005. So what the database does is that in the top of that pop-up window in the far left box, you can see that we've described what was written in the designation report, and then at the bottom we've entered a note saying that new construction exists there. With so much data to be transcribed, information for more than 27,000 buildings and sites, the data entry phase of the project was the most important and difficult part of the project. While overall management of the data entry process was provided by LPC staff, we were, with funding from the New York City Community Trust, able to hire 4 data fellows for data entry and quality control. Additional assistance also came from our 2017 Otto Platschek Fellow, with our LPC Research Department staff providing technical support as needed. Once the project reached production stage, the majority of data entry took approximately 6 months. After data entry was completed, a 2-month comprehensive quality control phase was launched with targeted quality control checks performed on an ongoing basis. But before I move on to the next slide, I do want to say that LPC staff are extremely grateful for the hard work of the data fellows who worked with us for those 6 months. You know, without their help, we could never have completed this project. And by April 2018, the project has all but been completed. As of today, data entry for roughly 36,000 buildings and sites in all 141 designated historic districts and 1,410 individual landmarks have been completed. Internally, we have also developed protocols to update the database as new designations of landmarks and historic districts occur. On a corollary to this, in December 2017, the LPC launched an enhanced Discover New York City Landmarks web map, which I'll be demoing after this presentation is over, which included building level data for historic districts. The map is the primary public access point for LPC data with the purpose of fostering a greater understanding of designated New York City landmarks. Features of the map include pop-ups which speed access to building information and filters which allow for analysis. As of today, actually literally today, buildings that make up our individual landmarks have also been added as a new feature to the web map. And we're also pleased to announce that the Historic Building Database was released onto the New York City Open Data Portal as a public data set on April 1st of this year. It joins 8 other LPC data sets already available on the portal. The data is available free for download in a variety of file formats. And that Open Data Portal, which I'll give a demonstration at the end of this presentation, can be accessed at opendata.cityofnewyork.us, and once there you can search landmarks.
So I want to talk about some very initial thoughts about how LPC is using the data project information, and also how the applicants and the public are using it as well. And this is, again, fairly new for us, and it's very exciting, so I think that the use is going to grow over time for sure. So for the LPC, for the agency, the information is certainly providing a clearer understanding of buildings and sites under LPC jurisdiction. It was very hard for us to understand buildings across historic districts, for example, federal-style buildings, some of New York City's oldest residential architecture. It wasn't very easy to quantify how many buildings were in the various historic districts and how many were designated. So being able to access that kind of information is extremely helpful for us. The information also allows for opportunities for increasing public awareness, and we can very quickly do specialized web maps for districts. What we're showing right now is a 3D website that Dan actually made for the Morningside Heights Historic District. So we're able to extrude this and show it in 3D, which allows people to have a better understanding of what the district looks like. And also, we have pop-ups with photographs and text photos in this, so it's a really helpful tool for us that now it's pretty easy for us to produce these. And for our research department, for the first time, we're able to very quickly do comparative analysis, so that we can quickly compare information across districts to look at all of the designated churches in a borough, for example, or all of the buildings designed by a certain architect across the city. And it adds depth and an element of quantitative analysis to our work. And staff can also more quickly tap into research that's been done over the 53 years of the agency's history, particularly for lesser-known architects or unusual styles, especially in Queens and the Bronx, where it's not, McKimmey and White. It's not a famous architect, so we can now access that information a lot more quickly. For the preservation staff, who have very large workloads, they benefit from really the ease of accessing information. And as Dan is going to show, the pop-ups provide the high-level information very quickly on the web map, but you can also then very quickly get to the designation report. So it's just easier to get this information. And finally, for our environmental review department, we now have a fast and accurate means to confirm historic resources in project areas. We do a lot of project review. For one of our core constituencies, which are property owners and applicants, they benefit from easy access to maps and historic building information, which they can use for presentations, such as seen here. They can just do a quick screen grab of the map and of their building. And also, again, easier access to the designation reports and this quick kind of comparative analysis. And finally, for the public use, I think this is a growing opportunity for us. And again, Dan's going to demo how we can use some of this information, and we have plans to make it even better and bigger. But there's easier access to building information and designation reports. And the visualization of buildings and data just makes the information much more fun and easy to understand. We're looking at Ellis Island in this image, and so you can just click through and see all the dates of the buildings and really sort of understand the development history of it very quickly. And also we have, this works in mobile applications, so you can actually look this up on your phone. So if you're out on the street and you really like a building and are wondering if it's designated or not, you can look it right up on your phone and see if it is. So I think with that, we're going to move to our demonstration.
The perilous live demo phase of the Okay. So actually, I should not have maximized that quite yet. But I just want to talk quickly about the best way to access the web application at the moment is through the LPC's homepage, which is nyc.gov/landmarks. And it's difficult to type standing up for some reason, but so if you go to our homepage and you scroll down, you'll see the map icon here, and you click on that and it'll take you right through. We're currently developing an improved version of this application, which will have a much easier to manage URL. As you can see, the current one is quite long and difficult to remember, so that's why I sort of pointed you through the agency's homepage for now. So I know I polled everybody earlier, but I'm going to ask another question, and that's just, how many of you have used sort of basic web mapping applications like Google Maps or Bing Maps? Probably almost everybody in the room, I would imagine. So the basic functions of this application in terms of navigation are basically the same. So you can, scroll around the map, you can zoom in, you can zoom out. It's fair. I would imagine it would be fairly intuitive. We have a few other features on the map that can kind of help you navigate to start with. So we have what's called a map overview, sort of a navigator screen. So you can pop this up from the bottom right-hand corner of the application, and it allows you, by dragging this rectangle here, to quickly move to a different part of the city, it's sort of a more efficient way than it would be just kind of like by scrolling through the main map window. We have an address finder. So we are at 20 West 44th Street right now. And it'll take you to that address. So it can be helpful as a starting point, especially if you're just generally interested in the neighborhood where you're walking around or where you live. And then other features in terms of map usability would be up here at the sort of the top right-hand corner. So we have how to use the map would just be basic instructions for how to use some of the tools, which I'll get into later. But just in case you don't remember everything I say tonight, this could be helpful later. So we have that, and then we have methodology and credits. So methodology is much more important. So this is a description of where the data on the map came from, how we developed. It's kind of a miniaturized version of what I just presented a few minutes ago. So where the data came from, how it was transferred into the geodatabase, and basically where it came from. So, read through that, it's important. And then we have the About tab, which is really just high-level information about the commission itself, what we do, when we were created, and our different landmarks types. Another important thing to remember in terms of basic navigation, and I think this is all I have on navigation, so I won't bore you too much, but is the map legend. And so the map legend is important because it's going to show you what's visible on the map at the moment that you're looking at it. So we have color-coded the different designation types. So once you get a general understanding of them, it'll be fairly easy to remember. So the fuchsia-colored polygons are individual landmarks. The sort of orangey yellow polygons are historic district buildings, and the lighter surrounds around them are historic district boundaries. The blue points are interior landmarks, and then let me zoom out a little bit more. Green are scenic landmarks. So, and this legend is reactive, so as you're scrolling in and out, you'll see that it changes as we get close enough that the buildings start to appear. And I'll get into the different data types in a second in a little bit more detail. So I just touched on this, but the main focus of this map, of course, is to give you more information on the 4 different designation types that the LPC has. So individual landmarks, interior landmarks, historic districts, and scenic landmarks. Those 4 different kinds of designation types can give you different types of information depending on sort of the zoom level you are at on the map. So at this level, with just boundaries showing or the points for individual landmarks, you can click on any of them and get information about them. And then you can also get a link to click through to the designation report. So in this case, the Ladies Mile Historic District, it'll open that report, and I'm not sure how fast the Wi-Fi is. It's quite a long report, so okay, there it is. So you immediately have access to geospatial data plus the original designation report. And this is true for all designation types. So trying to find another. The Consolidated Edison Company, same thing. If you see an image, click on it. If an image doesn't appear, if it's, if I made a mistake and it doesn't, you can click on this URL right above it and get the same designation report. So as you zoom closer into the map, you'll see that more information appears. And so what's happening is that the main focus of the Historic Building Data Project was to develop building by building data for the buildings contained, or buildings and sites contained in historic districts and individual landmarks. So the lighter yellow is the boundary of the district. The darker orange are the buildings associated with them. And just like the pop-ups that I just showed you, the pop-ups for the buildings also include information, just more of it. So in this case, and I think I went over this in pretty good detail earlier, but we have construction dates, architects and builders, owner developers, alterations, building types, and things like that. And this exists for, like I was saying, all individual landmarks in historic districts. And then as my announcement just a few moments ago about individual landmarks, so Silver Towers here at NYU, now you can get information on each of the towers instead of just previously where it was very generalized information on the landmark, or the landmark in total. In addition to designated landmarks, we also included information on calendared landmarks. So calendared landmarks meaning landmarks that are they're not designated, but they have begun the process towards designation. So they are included on the map because they are under official consideration by the agency. So it's helpful to know for the public, we believe, what the agency is considering for designation. And so those calendared items are on the map in either black points or gray boundaries. And so you can see Borum Hill here, or Coney Island down here, the Riegelman Boardwalk. So I covered this a little bit, but the most direct way to get information on data in the map is to use the pop-ups. So, whether you're interested in, general information on a historic district or just seeking to get really fast access to a designation report, you can click on the boundary. Or if you're more interested in looking at buildings, I would love to know more about the United States Courthouse, and I really hope that this is it, because they're right next to each other and I always get them confused. Okay. So then you can get information that's much more detailed than you would get through the boundary pop-up, and much faster than you would get by opening the designation report and then scrolling through it to find the building that you're interested in and pulling that information out yourself. And so one of the things in the feedback that we've gotten from the public is that can be confusing about the pop-ups is that you can think of this data as being layered one on top of another. So you have your boundaries of a historic district, for example, and then the individual buildings on top of that. And so when you click on the map, if you click on this building here, what pops up is, of course, the pop-up for the building itself, but then you can also, by hitting this little arrow, you can see my cursor, you can scroll to the next pop-up below it. So it's a way for you to say, click on this building here, and then, so this is giving you site level information, and then you click here and it takes you to the building level information. So that's an important thing to remember, kind of across designation types. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure that I'm keeping track of everything. You know, and the map, of course, is as Lisa described, is useful for, you know, the LPC staff, it's useful for applicants, it's useful for the public. I wanted to just give an example of the Ellis Island Historic District as a place that has a wealth of different buildings built over a different time period that are also also has different designation types. So many of us know the main building, which is, you know, a historic district building, but it's also an interior landmark. But then there are also other buildings around it that the public can explore and get to know better now. So we have the recreation building on Island 2. We have the measles wards on Island 3. So it's just a very fast way to go through and quickly get an understanding of this significant place in our city and nation's history that you would have spent a lot of time and effort getting earlier by going through the designation report on its own. You know, and this kind of gets back to what I was discussing earlier about how the styles have varied so much and they can be difficult to read. And so we hope that we've taken, we haven't replaced these designation reports, but we've made it easier to access much of the information that's within them. So that's basic map use. I wanted to get in next to the use of tools, or what we call widgets, on the map. So these tools are located on the upper left-hand side of the screen, and they'll appear, I think, in the same place if you're using this on your phone in the mobile version. But the landmark search tool might be the most commonly used tool of all of them. So this works on keywords. So say, for example, we were looking for landmarks with the word federal in the name. We'll type it in and it'll automatically give you back results. So the Federal Hall interior landmark, Federal Reserve Bank of New York. When you click on one of the results, it'll take you right there. So another good example is I don't know why it's so hard to type standing up. Prospect. So this gives you the Prospect Cemetery, individual landmark, Prospect Park scenic landmark, and then a whole host of historic districts. So that's one of the fastest ways to quickly find a landmark that you may have heard about or that you're interested in, and you don't necessarily want to scroll all the way across the map. The Landmarks Near Me tool is useful both for the desktop version of this application and the mobile version of the application. But what you can do is it'll perform a spatial search for you. So I'm going to use the 20 West 44th Street example again. And just look at the landmarks that are close by. So the application takes us to our building, and it's going to drop a pointer in front of it. And then with this slider here, you can say, show me the landmarks that are within a certain proximity to my location of choice. So say let's look at landmarks within roughly 1,000 feet of where we are now. And it comes back with the results. So 2 interior landmarks, 14 individual landmarks, and 1 scenic landmark. You can click on the list, say we're interested in the Fred F. French building, and it highlights it, and then also gives you that same information that's in the pop-up right here. So it'll quickly give you an idea of what's close by. You know, in Midtown, you can always be pretty sure that an individual landmark will be close. But if you're, say, somewhere out in central Brooklyn or, you know, eastern Queens, it can be a little bit more difficult. So this makes that task easier. And then finally, and probably the most interesting of the tools that we've developed, is the historic building filter. And so this is going to work on buildings that make up historic districts and individual landmarks. So you can quickly filter at either a large scale, you know, a broad scale, or a detailed scale, and get a return on the map that's going to give you some pretty insightful results. So I'm just going to give you guys a couple examples. Looking at the quick filter. So let's just look at a very broad example, which would be era of construction. So 1876 to 1900, a lot of construction and development happening in New York City. So what we do is we go down here and we select any of these sorry, I got a little ahead of myself. Let me turn this off. All of these are drop-down lists. I've used this so much for so long that I forget that not everyone is as comfortable with it as I am. But so within the quick filter, each one of these categories, so historic district, primary building style, architect or builder, building type or era of construction, are all drop-down lists. And what these do is it's looking at the entire database for, in this case, style, or in this case, historic district. And it allows you to choose one of those and then filter off of it. So you could choose, McKimmey and White, for example, and then filter off of that. In this case, let's look at era of construction. So we click on the drop-down list, the pop-up appears, and these are going to be all of the sort of 25-year intervals in which designated New York City landmarks were built in or completed in. So let's look at 1876 to 1900, just because the results are so dramatic. And then we go up here and we click on. And so what this does is it gives you a return that all of these buildings that appear were built within that 25-year time period. If we wanted to look at an earlier date, 1726 to 1750, you'd see, for example, that hardly anything, north of Canal Street was built. In fact, there aren't very many resources built in that period at all that we've designated. So there's era of construction. And then you can also look at, another great example would be looking at an architect or builder. So another great feature of this tool is that you can start typing in your choice. So in this case, let's look at George F. Pelham, a very prolific designer in the late 19th and early 20th century. If I start typing George, you can see there are lots of Georges that design buildings. Just make sure that's on. And then a lot of his work was done from north of Houston Street, so especially up on the Upper West and East sides. Whoops. So quite a lot over the time period of his career. One other thing that I should mention too is that the other categories within this filter are reactive to your first choice. So we've chosen George F. Pelham as a starting point. And if we want to look at the era of construction in which those buildings were built, we can click on this drop-down and we can see that basically he was working between these years. It could be that his first design happened in 1895 and his last one was completed in 1927, but we know that roughly it's happening within that 50-year time period. Same thing goes for if we're interested in looking at which historic districts those designations are in. Quite a few, actually. So I will say, too, that there are a couple of filtering options. So there's the quick filter, but then there's also the advanced filter. And the advanced filter, so the quick filter works on drop-down lists and kind of locks you in to making choices from that list. The advanced filter is a keyword search. So if we're looking at the same George F. Pelham, actually I'll just type in Pelham and turn this one on. It'll include George F. Pelham. It could include George F. Pelham plus if the firm he worked for was part of the designation report, it'll return that as well. But it's one way to sort of get a more comprehensive result. I will say, too, that I mentioned earlier that we were in the process of developing a new web application. The new web application will have an improved filtering capability as well, so that's something to look forward to. And then one other example I wanted to give everyone is the way that you can actually use the filtering tool to drill down and answer questions in more specific areas of the city as opposed to looking at the city in total. And so the example I wanted to give you would be if you were, say, interested in seeing the number of neo-Grec row houses in the Bedford Historic District. So we'll turn on the filter. It's filtering out everything that's not in Bedford. And then I'm going to use my little navigation tool to go all the way down into Brooklyn. So there's the Bedford Historic District. So like I was saying, because these categories are reactive, we can go down again to primary building type. And we have a much more limited list of building types. If I wouldn't have limited this before, it would probably be something like 100 building types that you could choose from. So we then choose row house, and it further limits our choice. And then we can go to primary building style, and again, we're coming up with a more limited selection of styles, and then we can choose neo-Grec. And that gives you all your purely neo-Grec row houses within the Bedford Historic District. So rather quickly, you can go and you can do these high-level searches citywide, or for broad trends, or for looking at architects, regardless of which district they're in. Or you can go and you can drill down by using the reactive nature of the different categories within the advanced filter and the quick filter. So I would say that it's, it takes a little while to get used to, and I would say, play around with it, and then make use of the how to use the map tab. The instructions for all of the tools are pretty in depth, and so that can be a help. So, and then lastly, or nearing lastly, I also wanted to let you guys know that we value your feedback in regards to this data highly. We did as much as we possibly could do to ensure the highest level of quality for this information, but we realize that we're not infallible and that mistakes do happen. And so what we've included is a data and map feedback portal as well. So if you click on this link, it'll pull up this web form. And I'm going to submit an error to myself. You can type in this information, so the name of the building or site, the address of the location of the proposed change. Your name and the email address are optional, but it's helpful for us if you include that if we have any questions. And then a description of the error or the issue that you've encountered, a suggested change. So say you look at your building and then you compare it to the designation report and we miss something. You would put it in this description of error, use, and suggested change section. Source of suggested change, you would of course write the designation report, and then here you can place a pin for where the building is in the city. And so what this does is I get a notification that you found an error, or that you think you found an error, and then I can easily go to it in a geospatial way. So that's there. We encourage people to use it as the primary method for giving us feedback. And then finally, I just got my 2-minute warning. I promised to show you guys the Open Data Portal. So the Open Data Portal is actually an amazing resource, not just for the Landmarks Preservation Commission, but for New York City agencies that produce data as a whole. So you can find, 311 information. You can find taxi information. You can find DOB violations. In our case, for the Landmarks Preservation Commission, if you just type in landmarks in this search bar, so we've gone to opendata.cityofnewyork.us, and you just hit enter, you come up with a list of data sets. I think the agency at this point is posting and maintaining 9 data sets, the most recent being the data that we were just speaking about tonight. So you can download this in a variety of file formats, shape files, tabular data, etc. But despite that, we still think that the easiest way to access this data for most members of the public is through our web application, and we hope you use it. Thank you.
So Dan and I are both here to answer any questions that you may have about the data project. I also want to say we're joined by Erica Rothman, an LPC staffer who also helped with the project, so we're grateful for that.
Good evening. I'm not so well informed about Landmark, but there are issues, right, like the village or around Grand Central. Now, would you make those recommendations, which buildings are historic or which are not? Is that how you work with the city? I don't understand how you work.
Yeah, so that is the role of the agency. So we, we are an expert agency in historic preservation. So the research staff really, through surveying buildings, through, getting suggestions from elected officials or the community, will evaluate whether something meets our criteria for designation. And then we'll go through the process of researching and considering it. But ultimately, it's our commission, our commissioners, who vote on whether something should or should not be designated, essentially.
It gets hot and heavy, right?
Hi, I think it looks terrific. I use the NYC GIS map, and I want to know, they have links there for things like to ACRIS, Department of Buildings. Will there be a link eventually to this?
I'm not sure. That's not something that we have planned in our near term. I also use that map all the time, and the links are fantastic. This is, as Dan always says to me, very complicated data that we have produced because we are, essentially transcribing our designation reports. So I'm not sure. Dan, do you think that could happen?
I'm also not completely sure. I'm not trying to be evasive, but I think we're always looking for ways to improve the application and improve ways for the public to get access to not only our information, but then so much of the value of data is being able to compare it or use it with other data sources. So, I think it's something we could explore.
Looks like a first feedback suggestion.
It could be, yes.
Good.
Oh, that is, I always get it through Googling.
Is it City Map? Are you
Yeah.
NY City Map? Is that the one you're referring to?
Yeah. Do you know the URL? by
I don't know how to
If you just NY City Map, it'll come up. No need.
heart?
Should I? Can I ask a question back here?
Oh, sure, yes.
Do you include buildings that were considered for designation but not ultimately designated?
This map only covers buildings that went all the way through the designation process. So,
Okay,
yeah,
okay. All right, thank you.
sure.
Thank you for the incredible project, amazing project, and resource. Just question in general, what is considered the restrictions, if any, on landmark buildings, sites, historical? Could you discuss a little? I know it's very involved. Maybe you can pick a couple of thoughts because I really know nothing about it.
Sure. So any building that is designated, the commission and the agency regulate any changes. So, that can be anything from small changes to, say, changing of a door or, replacing windows in kind, to much larger projects from, say, a rooftop addition or, sometimes we review new buildings in historic districts. So it's a whole range of work, but essentially, once a building is designated, we do review the work that's being done, and sometimes that's done at a staff level, sometimes that is something that has to go to our commission for a public hearing, and community boards and other stakeholders weigh in on what they think about the appropriateness of change. So we don't stop change from happening, we seek to regulate it to make sure that it's appropriate.
Hi, this is a terrific resource, and I use it on a regular basis as a preservation architect and advocate. And I wonder if there could still be more. For instance, we know that LPC has individual photograph of each individual building designated, and one of the most basic, kind of next steps I would imagine would be that in addition to finding all this information on each building, one would also eventually be able to see the photograph of each individual building at the time when the district or the building was designated, and even going beyond and perhaps linking or digitizing the photograph from the 1940s or 1980 taxes at the municipal archive that are extremely useful and everybody uses for any presentation, and eventually making those available in these platforms. Is that something that would be possible, or is it making?
Yeah, we definitely share that goal, and it's possible, but some of it might be harder than you think. So in terms of our photos, so when a building is designated, the LPC takes photos of its condition, in the day or days after it's been designated, because when we designate something, it's designated as as is condition, essentially. We don't have all of those digitized, and we actually don't necessarily have a good photo server, yet for those. So that's actually kind of the hardest part, but we really would like to get those up. The tax photos, I don't want to speak for another agency necessarily, but I understand they're in the process of being digitized, and it actually might not be that far in the future. So we are eagerly awaiting that. We are exploring, I think in the very near term, to have contemporary images. It's not legal to use Google Images, but we have a different way to do that, and I think that's going to be really exciting, and probably not that far in the future that we'll have that. But certainly photographs are definitely our next big goal for this. But I think having the data there provides this really strong foundation for us to be able to do that kind of work.
Is there any information in the database about development rights or transferable development rights of landmarks, either within districts or otherwise?
No, this is, essentially transcribing our own designation reports. I would say that the New York City map actually you have to kind of do a quick calculation yourself, but it does have a lot of information about, the floor area ratio of a building and the size of lots and the building. So you can actually do some pretty quick calculations yourself using this web map that we have up. There's someone behind.
You've said it a couple of times, but I keep missing it because I just want to take a picture of it. But could you put the web address on the screen, big letters again, so we can get to that wonderful data source that you have there with the maps and everything else? I just want to know what the address is. That's my first question. And then my second question is Neo-Grec another word for Greek revival? Because I never heard Neo-Grec before. I've heard Greek revival. So could you just explain that? Because I really don't know.
Do you want to do styles? Dan and I are neither one of us are like the hardcore researchers.
Yeah, I would say.
So basically,
the answer is no.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think of a good way to answer, but Greek revival would be much earlier than Neo-Grec.
Yeah.
But I couldn't enumerate the differences for you.
We actually do have information on our website about different styles, and we have lots and lots of designated Neo-Grec buildings that are very commonly found in our row house districts. I have a feeling there's a couple people here that could go into great detail about the style itself, but it's essentially a turn of the century style that looked back to Greek origins, but was something that was very commonly found in our row house districts, our brownstone districts. Yeah, so is this what you meant for the open data portal?
Yeah, that you can click on those buildings and see the data, and then just what you just went through. I'd like to know the address of how to get to that.
Yeah, I'm just going to actually put it up in Word, because it's the best way to access it is through our through the agency website. So you can actually see this in bold. So we could keep answering questions if you'd like while I do this.
Yeah, and I think this will be our last question. Okay.
I'm going to be sneaky and ask two. One's a feature question and one's just a tech platform question. The feature question is if property owners of designated properties have proposals before LPC to do modifications to their properties, is that in any way cross-referenced with this particular database? And the platform question was just, I noticed that the tiles are Esri's, but I was wondering if the whole platform is Esri's technology, and if not, just at a high level, what you're using.
Okay, I'll answer the first one. Dan can do the second. So right now we have a portal on our website here that can get you to our permit database. So it actually is a separate one. That's another thing that we're looking, again, to sort of improve.
The address and then find it.
Yeah, it's just, our addresses aren't the easiest to find. It's pretty navigable if you just go to our homepage. And then...
Yeah, and then the platform is an Esri platform, so it's ArcGIS Online. You know, it's a great resource for us, you know, as holders of Esri licenses, we have access to this product, and then also is not, I don't want to downplay our tech savviness, but we're preservationists and urban planners for the most part, you know, and we know GIS, but you know, we are not web developers. So ArcGIS Online makes it easy for people like us with the resources we have to spin up applications like this that do what we would like them to do.
And yes, I want to say thank you so much. And I'm sorry if I missed a couple of people, but I'm sure Lisa and Daniel will be happy to answer more questions afterwards. Lisa and Daniel, that was really fantastic. I appreciate how much work, one, you put in for this evening, but two, how much you and how much work and research your colleagues have done to compile this really absolutely incredible resource. It really is absolutely fantastic. And as you say, it can be used for absolute fun, but it can also be used for serious research. So again, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much. We would now like to make a presentation to you, and to do so is our Executive Director, Victoria A. Dengel.
Thank you. So, yes, and thank you so much to Lisa and to Daniel. And it always fascinates me, you know, as a native New Yorker, just how much is in our wonderful city, even thinking about the 13 miles of Manhattan and how much exists. And so thank you to the Landmarks Commission for making more investigation possible from the comfort of one's home. And for anyone who's interested in Neo-Grec, I quickly looked it up, and it's all over the internet. So, but let me just quickly say, no, you don't have to look it up yourself. Hold on. Neo-Grec, I'll just, two quick sentences. Neo-Grec was a neoclassical revival style of the mid to late 18th century that was popularized in architecture, the decorative arts, and in painting during France's Second Empire or the reign of Napoleon III. And it goes on to say more, so we can I'll spare you. And so the General Society of Mechanics and Tradesmen of the City of New York, founded 1785 and landmarked in 1988 our facade, so it took a while, but we express our gratitude to Lisa Kersavage and Daniel Watts from the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission for your program, Landmarks Preservation Commission's Historic Building Data Project, for their participation in the General Society Labor, Literature, and Landmark Lecture Series. Thank you so much. Thank you. And as everyone knows who comes to our lectures, because we don't like to let anyone go once we've met them, we've made you both lifetime library members. So thank you. There you go.
So, in conclusion, I would like to thank you all for coming this evening. I'd like to thank Lisa and Daniel again so much. I hope you will all join us for a glass of wine now. And I just want to mention that the next landmark lecture in our series is Tuesday, May 15th. Hopefully it might be spring by then. And we will have Joan Berkowitz and Caroline Cast from both of Facade Compliance, and they're going to talk about reflections of 35 years of facade inspections. And I promise it's going to be a really fun lecture, so I hope you'll come back for that. Thank you so much for coming this evening.